If you walk into any operating theater on Earth right now, you will find an environment defined by intense, highly engineered precision. You will see surgeons relying on specific scalpel blades designed for distinct types of incisions and closing internal tissues with sutures that harmlessly dissolve on their own. We tend to assume the rigorous scientific method behind these tools is a product of the European Renaissance, but the exact blueprint for this operating room, down to the shape of the blades and the concept of the dissolving stitch, was written 1,000 years ago by a single Muslim physician in Cordoba. In the 10th century, surgery was rarely considered a respected medical science. It was a low-status, dangerous craft, usually performed by barbers and tradesmen using crude tools. Because nothing was formally standardized, medical knowledge was intensely localized. When a master surgeon died, his exact techniques and tool designs almost always died with him. This created a lethal bottleneck in medieval medicine. Attempting to operate inside the human body was practically a death sentence due to the risk of post-operative infection and trauma. This was the world Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi stepped into. Born just outside Cordoba in the royal city of Medina Azahara, he had direct access to the wealth and accumulated knowledge of a golden age Islamic civilization. But rather than chase fame at the royal court, he spent 5 straight decades rooted in his community, clinically observing and treating thousands of patients across every social class. Through those 50 years of practice, he realized that if he wanted to save lives, he had to rescue surgery from the realm of guesswork and document it as a formal science. He poured a half-century of clinical data into a massive 30-volume medical encyclopedia, the Al-Tasrif. The 30th volume focused specifically on the procedures and tools of surgery. This work departed from previous traditions by including detailed drawings, making it the first illustrated surgical manual in history. Inside, he cataloged over 200 distinct, highly specialized surgical instruments, many of which he designed himself for delicate procedures. He provided exact specifications on how a blacksmith should forge each piece of metal, alongside step-by-step clinical guides on how to wield them in the operating room. This visual standardization solved the crisis of localized knowledge. A physician thousands of miles away could safely replicate a complex procedure, relying entirely on Al-Zahrawi's exact geometric drawings. As this shared visual data expanded, it replaced the dangerous, fragmented oral traditions of the past. This established the model of the illustrated medical textbook, a format that allowed complex surgical techniques to be preserved and taught across generations. But Al-Zahrawi still had to solve the single most lethal problem of his era: closing wounds deep inside the body. Any standard thread used to stitch an internal organ eventually had to be removed. That meant a second invasive surgery just to pull the stitches out, exposing a recovering patient to massive risk of infection. According to historical accounts, the solution presented itself when Al-Zahrawi noticed his pet monkey chewing on and swallowing the strings of his musical instrument. Those strings were made of catgut, a tough, fibrous material derived from the dried intestinal lining of sheep and cattle, traditionally used on the Arabic oud. Watching the animal, the trained physician observed something crucial. The monkey's digestive enzymes broke down and absorbed the catgut strings completely, with no adverse effects. Al-Zahrawi carefully sterilized the catgut and used it to stitch internal human tissue, creating the world's very first dissolvable surgical suture. By utilizing a material that was naturally absorbed, Al-Zahrawi effectively ended the requirement for secondary operations just to retrieve internal stitches. Right around Al-Zahrawi's death in 1013, the political unity of Islamic Spain fractured. A civil war threatened to erase his life's work. Fortunately, physical copies of the Al-Tasrif survived the collapse and made their way to the translation centers of Toledo, where scholars translated the Arabic text into Latin. The Latin version, known as Albucasis de Chirurgia, was widely adopted as the authority in Salerno and Montpellier, some of Europe's earliest medical schools. For 5 straight centuries, longer than most modern nations have existed, Al-Zahrawi's manuals served as the primary surgical reference for the European continent. While the European scientific revolution is often framed as a localized awakening, its surgical practices were built directly upon the clinical findings translated from Al-Andalus. His deepest legacy was philosophical. Al-Zahrawi successfully argued that surgery should not be left to tradesmen, but but viewed as a rigorous academic discipline requiring immense education and ethical care. When we look at a modern surgical tray today, we are looking at the direct descendants of his mind. The shape and functionality of the scalpel blade hold the distinct contours of his 10th century designs. Every synthetic dissolvable stitch used to close modern internal surgeries traces its lineage straight back to a physician in a Cordoban courtyard. Al-Zahrawi's work demonstrates that the reach of a medical insight is defined by the precision of its documentation, ensuring that a discovery made in one century can still be practiced in the next.